During a tense live TV broadcast, an arrogant journalist tried to corner Ibrahim Traoré with harsh, condescending questions, but no one was ready for what happened next. Traoré's calm, unwavering answers didn't just dismantle the journalist's attacks. They left the entire studio stunned and silent. This moment would soon spread like wildfire, a testament to his strength, clarity, and the rare dignity of true leadership. The studio lights burned hot, cameras rolling in Alan Diarra, the sharp-tongued journalist famous for ambushing his guests, leaned forward, a smirk playing on his lips. Across from him sat one man in a plain military uniform. No bodyguards, no political handlers. Just him, Ibrahim Traoré, transitional president of Burkina Faso. Alan wasted no time. "Mr. Traoré," he began, his voice cutting, "how does a man with no formal political pedigree plan to lead a country torn apart by terrorism and poverty?" Silence swallowed the room. Behind the glass, producers exchanged worried glances. Alan wasn't done. He chuckled, leaned back, then shot forward with venom. "Some say you're just a boy playing soldier in a real man's game. What do you say to that?" The hush was instant. A stagehand dropped her clipboard. An assistant turned off her headset mic and whispered, "He's pushing too far." But Traoré didn't flinch. He looked Alan in the eyes, not with anger, but with an unshakable calm. Then, in a steady voice that carried through every inch of the room, he said, "Do you ask those who bleed for their people to prove their worth? Or do you stand with them and ask what you can give?" A heartbeat of stillness. Then the camera slowly zoomed in. Across town, in a dusty living room, a 10-year-old boy named Kareem sat cross-legged on the cracked floor. He wore an old shirt 2 sizes too big. Next to him, his grandmother slept fitfully on a thin mat. The TV flickered, signal weak, but Kareem didn't blink. He didn't really know who this man in uniform was. But there was something in Ibrahim's voice that felt familiar, like an uncle, like a father, like someone who had once slept on the same cold floor. Back on stage, Alan pressed harder. "You talk about sacrifice, Mr. President, but will you admit your government has failed in areas where others warned you?" Kareem's small fist clenched in his lap. He whispered at the TV, "Let him talk. Please, just let him talk." Traoré smiled gently. "I didn't come here to prove I am perfect," he said. "I came to serve, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts." Kareem exhaled shakily. He'd never heard a leader say anything like that. In that moment, he felt something no speech had ever given him. Hope. In the control room upstairs, producer Lucy wiped sweat from her forehead. She'd booked this interview hoping for chaos. A slip-up, an outburst, something to light up the ratings. She never expected calm. She never expected a man who answered fire with truth. Then her direct line rang, the Prime Minister's office. Lucy's stomach dropped as she picked up. "Do not cut the feed," the voice ordered. "Let the people hear him. Let the truth speak." Alan leaned forward, eyebrows arched like a knife. "Tell us, Mr. President, why should we believe that you, a man with no family dynasty, no Western education, no elite circle, can lead this country out of darkness?" The camera zoomed in. Traoré's answer came like a river, strong, gentle, unstoppable. "Because I was that barefoot boy who sold mangoes to pay for school. Because I still walk where others drive. And because power to me is not a crown, it is a burden and I carry it for them." Lucy stared at the screen, blinking back tears she didn't understand. She glanced at the view counter. 250,000, 400,000, 700,000 and climbing. Something special was happening. Something raw and real. Backstage, Adama, a teenage intern tasked with pouring water for guests, found himself rooted behind the curtain. He'd lost his father, a soldier, to terrorists near the northern border. Since then, he'd grown up angry at men in uniform. But watching Traoré speak with such quiet strength cracked something open in him. This wasn't a man chasing medals. This was a man standing alone for millions. Alan, rattled but desperate, jabbed again. He gestured at Traoré's chest. "I see your medals, but tell me, Mr. President, do medals feed our people?" Traoré didn't blink. "No," he said softly. "They do not, but the sacrifices behind them protect the people who do the feeding." Adama pressed a hand to his mouth. For the first time since his father's funeral, he smiled. Papa would have followed this man, he whispered. Across the city, Kareem wiped away tears, silent ones that slipped down his dusty cheeks. His grandmother snored quietly beside him. On the TV, the man who looked like a soldier but spoke like a teacher was still speaking. For boys like him. Alan's voice rose, voice cracking. What makes you think you know what's best for this country? Traoré paused, eyes soft but unflinching. Because I have slept in the rain. I have taught children with no shoes. I have buried friends with no coffins. I know hunger. I know pain. And I have seen hope even in the darkest places. Kareem's chest ached. He remembered when his teacher kicked him out of class for unpaid fees. How he cried into his grandmother's lap that night. And now, this man, this president, was speaking his story aloud for the whole country to hear. Kareem grabbed an old, battered school notebook. He turned to a blank page and began sketching the man's face, writing one word beneath it. Hope. In the control room, Lucy's voice cracked as she whispered, "It's not the scandal I wanted. It's better." The view count climbed. 950,000, 1.2 million. Comments poured in. Alan was visibly sweating now. He slammed his hands on the desk. "Isn't it true?" he barked. But the next question stuck in his throat. Because when real truth stands in front of you, sometimes even the loudest voices fall silent. In that studio, under the blazing lights, one man's calm broke through the noise, and a boy in a dusty living room believed for the first time that a leader could stand for him, and the world, watching, could feel it too. Some said it was just a political stunt, a soldier's trick for the cameras. But that night, under hot studio lights, Ibrahim Traoré's calm shattered the cynicism of an entire nation. Alan Diarra, the journalist known for cutting his guests down with sly smiles and sharp questions, leaned forward like a predator. "Some say your leadership is nothing but a military costume party, Mr. Traoré," he sneered. "Just a stunt, a show. What do you say to that?" Traoré didn't flinch. He let the silence sit until it filled the space between them like thunder. Then he said gently, "There are people who wear uniforms to control, and there are people who wear them to protect. I chose the second." The studio erupted in soft applause, the first ripple of warmth that night. Alan froze. That was not in his script. Behind the glass, Lucy, the show's lead producer, felt her throat tighten. She had lost her father to war years ago, a last whispered call from a battlefield she had buried in the deepest part of her mind. Now, this man's words were dragging it back up, not to wound her, but to remind her what real sacrifice looked like. She wiped away a tear before it fell. The cameras kept rolling, but this silence, heavy, deep, wasn't awkward. It was a hush that comes when a room holds its breath, afraid to miss a heartbeat of truth. Alan leaned in for the kill, his words acidic. "Do you ever feel guilty, Mr. President? Sitting in your palace while mothers bury sons who die for your battles?" The studio crew flinched, but Traoré didn't meet fire with fire. He looked up, eyes dark but soft. His voice cracked just enough for the truth to bleed through. "Every single night," he said, "I write their names in my journal. I visit their families. I walk their villages. Power doesn't protect me from pain. It forces me to carry it." No applause this time. Just a sound of truth settling on every shoulder, like a weight they didn't know they needed. Alan looked down, shuffling his cue cards. He'd run out of arrows. Backstage, Adama, the shy intern assigned to refill the water jugs, wiped his face, surprised to find his hands wet. His father, a soldier, had died fighting in the north. He'd grown up resenting uniforms. But now, hearing Ibrahim speak, he saw something different. A leader who did not hide behind medals but carried his people's grief on his own shoulders. Traoré cleared his throat. "I visited a camp in Kaya," he said. He adjusted his collar, voice steady. "I met a little girl named Aminata. She was 7. Her father killed by rebels. Her mother taken by illness. Alone, yet she smiled." Alan rolled his eyes. "And what does that have to do with policy, Mr. President?" Traoré looked at him, not with hate, but with something deeper, sorrow for a man who still didn't get it. "Everything," he said. "She told me. If I can smile, maybe others will too. That child reminded me, leadership is not about control, it's about healing. Silence again. A woman in the audience. Kata, a mother who hadn't watched politics since her son died to a roadside bomb, put her hand over her mouth and wept, not out of fresh pain, but relief. Finally, a leader who spoke without rehearsed lines, a man who led from the soul. In the control booth, Lucy's headset buzzed. We're getting calls from Mali, Ivory Coast, Ghana. Another producer shouted. France is airing this live, look. Clips were already going viral. Traoré hadn't raised his voice once, but the world was straining to hear every word. Alan, desperate now, tried one last trap. If you really loved your people, wouldn't you step down, let a civilian lead this country? The bait was bitter, the trap obvious. Traoré just nodded. One day, yes, but not yet, because the house is on fire, and I am the one holding the hose. When it's safe, I will go, not for glory, but so the next leader can plant seeds without fearing the flames. The cameraman whispered. Merville Allen sat back, eyes wide. He was losing. The studio felt it, the shift from politics to something raw and human. Across Burkina Faso, fathers hug sons tighter. Mothers reach for tissues. Children watch wide-eyed, learning a new word, respect. A staffer slipped a folded note into Traorés's hand mid-broadcast. He read it once, then looked up at the camera. Permission to share something? Alan stuttered. Go ahead. Traoré held up the note. This is a letter from Captain Sidibe. He died yesterday in Djibo. He asked me to read this if anything happened to him. The studio held its breath. Traorés's voice was soft, but it carried like a drumbeat to every living room in the country. Mon President, if I die, please tell my son why I fought, not for medals, not for power, but so he can one day play football without hearing gunshots, so he can go to school with both shoes, so he can smile. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it back into his jacket. Captain Sidibe was 31. His wife is watching now with her 3-year-old boy. The camera caught Alan's pale face. The predator turned powerless. Lucy pressed her hand to her mouth. People weren't just watching. They were feeling every word. Traoré cleared his throat again. I'd like to invite someone, he said, to everyone's surprise. Alan looked up, confused. Excuse me? Traoré gestured toward the curtain. Out stepped a young woman in plain clothes, shoulders square, eyes clear. This, Traoré said, voice warm, is Fatima, a nurse. She works alone in a conflict zone hospital in Fadangurma. The audience gasped. Fatima raised a trembling hand in greeting. Traoré stepped aside. She spoke, her voice shaking but stronger than any speech. I've stitched wounds with no anesthesia. I've cradled babies crying for mothers they'll never see again. Last week, rebels came. I hid 2 newborns under a table with my own body until the army arrived. If not for President Traoré's men, they wouldn't be here. Alan opened his mouth, but said nothing. The truth had entered the room, and it was wearing a nurse's tired smile. Outside, word spread like wildfire. A crowd gathered beyond the glass windows, hundreds holding candles. It wasn't an interview anymore. It was a movement. The producers begged for a break, but Traoré leaned into the mic 1 more minute. He turned straight to the lens. My father was a farmer. My mother taught me to read under a mango tree. We had no lights, but we had love. That's what shaped me. Not titles, not medals. He paused, voice a whisper, but powerful enough to shake the walls. I do not pretend to be perfect, but every decision I make, I ask, would my mother be proud of this? Would that little boy in Djibo understand it? No lights now, no glitz, just truth. Outside, the crowd started singing the national anthem, soft but strong. Inside, Fatima covered her mouth, fighting back sobs. Adama, in the tea shop down the street, stood tall for the first time since his father's funeral. He wasn't just refilling water jugs tonight. He was seeing what hope looked like when it wore a uniform and spoke with a human heart. Back in the studio, the cameras kept rolling. No one dared cut away. Within 48 hours, what started as an interview had become something else entirely. A reckoning, a mirror, a wake-up call. And the world wasn't ready for what Ibrahim Traoré was becoming. Just when the lights came back up, Traoré surprised everyone again. He held up a small, folded page from his jacket pocket. "I received a message yesterday," he said, his voice soft but carrying through every microphone. "From a 12-year-old boy in the north." He opened it carefully. "His name is Yakuba." He began to read, each word like a drumbeat that refused to be ignored. "Dear Mr. President, I want to be brave like you. My father died when bandits came. My mother cries at night. I don't want toys. I just want to feel safe. Please don't give up on us." Yakuba, Alan Diarra, the once cocky journalist, sat frozen, jaw locked tight. He didn't dare interrupt. Traoré looked straight into the lens. "Yakuba, I hear you, and I'm not giving up." Hundreds of miles away, in a dusty village, Yakuba sat cross-legged on a mat beside his mother, huddled by an old neighbor's radio. When she heard the president say her boy's name, she wept, not out of grief, but out of a hope she thought had died years ago. In the studio, no one breathed. The people watching on tiny TV sets or cracked smartphones could feel it. This was no longer about politics. It was personal. For the first time, millions didn't see a leader as some distant figure on a podium. They saw him as a father, a brother, a protector who actually listened. Alan finally found his voice, but the sharpness was gone, replaced by something closer to shame. "Mr. President," he asked, clearing his throat, "isn't this emotional appeal just good theater? Isn't it easier to read letters than to actually build a country?" The silence that followed sliced through the air. Traoré didn't flinch. He stood up, walked to the middle of the stage, and sat cross-legged on the floor, the president of Burkina Faso, on the cold studio floor like any village boy. "I've walked barefoot to school," he began. "I've eaten from the same bowl as 10 cousins. My leadership doesn't come from books. It comes from pain." He raised a finger to the camera. "If all you see is a man performing, then you've missed the point. This isn't about me. This is about what we owe to those who've lost everything." Alan lowered his eyes. There was nowhere left to hide. Traoré's voice fell to a whisper that hit harder than any shout. "I'm not acting," he said. "I'm remembering." That line cut through the studio, through living rooms, through the walls of cynicism so many people had built to survive. Veterans watching from battered sofas stood and saluted. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Even Alan's own producer, tough, battle-hardened Lucy, turned away to wipe tears from her eyes. But the storm wasn't over. If anything, it was only beginning. That night, sleep wouldn't come to the city of Ouagadougou. By 9 p.m., the streets were glowing, but not with flames. Candles, thousands of them. People came out of their homes silently, carrying candles, photos of lost loved ones, small flags. Children stood shoulder to shoulder with elders. They didn't chant in anger. They stood for hope. Soft voices rose. "Noam Zunis, Noam Zunis." We are together. We are together. Inside his modest home, Traoré watched through the window. He turned to his aide and said quietly, "Not a word from me tonight. Let the people speak now." In a tiny rural hospital, Fatima the nurse knelt by a faded photo of Captain Sidibe in Jibbo and lit her candle too. In the north, Yakuba's mother hugged him close, telling him he was safe. And back at the TV station, Alan Diarra sat alone, replaying the interview on a flickering monitor. He paused at Traoré's final line. "I'm not acting. I'm remembering." For the first time in his career, Alan understood what real leadership looked like. But a storm was still inside him. He disappeared from the public eye for 2 days. Rumors flew. Some said he was hiding in shame. Others said he'd run away. But inside his tiny apartment, Alan sat unshaven and unsteady, watching that clip on a loop. Every cruel question, every cheap smirk. It all sounded hollow now. But what broke him most was the president's calm strength. He turned to the window. Down below, 2 barefoot children played with nothing but a stick and a dream, giggling under the streetlights. He remembered once being like them, a boy who wanted to use his voice to defend the voiceless, not tear down the good. Alan collapsed onto his living room floor and wept. Then he stood, He knew what he had to do. Something bigger than an apology. Something the world would never forget. The next morning, Alan requested live airtime. The network hesitated until they saw the fire in his eyes. They gave him the same chair, the same lights. But this time there was no expensive suit. Just a plain shirt and a face that had found humility. When the red light came on, Alan looked into the camera, hands trembling. "I failed you all," he said, voice cracking. "I tried to corner a man who has given his life to protecting our people. I used my voice to divide instead of unite." He paused, breath shaking. But President Traoré showed me and showed the world what leadership really looks like. He stood strong not for himself, but for every Burkinabe child, mother, and soldier. That is the man I now admire. There was silence, then cheers, then tears, then screens lighting up across the country. And then, unexpectedly, Traoré walked onto the set. No grand entrance, no announcement. He put a hand on Alan's shoulder. "This is how nations heal," he said softly. That evening, Traoré didn't sit in a palace or hold high-level meetings. He walked through the streets of Ouagadougou with Alan beside him. No cameras, no bodyguards, just two men on the dusty outskirts. They stopped where a group of barefoot boys played with sticks and stones. One boy ran up, eyes wide. "Are you the man on TV?" he asked. Traoré smiled. "I am, but more importantly, I'm your servant." The boy tilted his head. "You serve people?" Traoré knelt to the boy's level, placing a hand on his shoulder. Every real leader does. A bystander's phone captured that moment. The president holding the boy's hand, walking him home. Within hours, that clip spread like wildfire across Africa. It reminded millions that leadership isn't about podiums or titles. It's about walking barefoot with the people you serve. The week ended not with fireworks or grand speeches, but with something deeper, the memory of humility, redemption, and unity. From that day on, Burkina Faso didn't remember the argument. They remembered the healing. Not the question, but the answer. If this story moved you, if your heart felt something deep, don't scroll away. Like this video to share the message of humility and real leadership. Drop a comment below, say, "I believe in hope," if you felt the power of truth and kindness. And subscribe for more true, emotional stories that change not just lives, but nations. Because sometimes the strongest voice is the one that speaks calmly. And the greatest power is the love you hold for your people.